24 years of absolute rule. This era was defined by 3 wars, thousands of chemical strikes, and systematic executions. But in 2003, the system collapsed. The United States invasion of Iraq shattered the regime in weeks. April 9, 2003, Baghdad fell. At that moment, Saddam Hussein vanished from the world map. How does a dictator disappear? At first glance, he had an army, but in reality, he had only a few loyalists and a series of holes in the ground. The footage from that time shows empty palaces and toppled statues. Saddam was no longer in a command center. He was on the move across central Iraq. For 240 days, he shifted between safe houses and rural farms. He avoided electronic communication. He used no phones. He relied on handwritten notes and trusted messengers. He focused his movements around Tikrit. This was his birthplace in the Salah al-Din province. He believed the local tribes would provide a permanent shield. He was wrong. The hunt was relentless. Task Force 21 and CIA operatives worked 24 hours a day. They gathered intelligence from satellites, wiretaps, and local informants. They didn't just look for Saddam. They tracked his cooks, his guards, and his extended family members. One by one, the inner circle broke. Soldiers raided houses at dawn. They seized ledgers, address books, and family photos. Each interrogation provided a new coordinate. The circle tightened around the Tigris River. The search narrowed to a specific triangle of land. U.S. forces deployed heavy armor and thermal sensors to the towns of Ad-Dar, Samarra, and Tikrit. They searched every cellar and every orchard. The sound of helicopter rotors became constant. There was no turning back. Saddam Hussein was running out of space. December 13, 2003. Under the cover of darkness, the military launched Operation Red Dawn. The name came from a 1984 war film. Command identified 2 primary targets near the town of Ad-Dar. They labeled these rural farmhouses Wolverine 1 and Wolverine 2. The location sat 15 kilometers south of Tikrit. 600 soldiers moved into position. The force included the 4th Infantry Division and Task Force 121. This was a specialized unit of elite special operations troops. They didn't move alone. Helicopters circled above while armored vehicles blocked the perimeter. Intelligence came from a direct source. A former bodyguard finally broke under interrogation. He gave up the coordinates. The troops focused on a small walled compound. They cleared the perimeter. Then they spotted it. A pile of bricks and loose dirt sat in the corner. Soldiers moved the debris. Underneath lay a hidden opening. It was a vertical shaft about 8 feet deep. There was only enough room for one person to lie down. The world would soon know it as the spider hole. A soldier looked inside. He saw a man. It was Saddam Hussein. The footage shows a different man than the one on the palace posters. He was thin. His hair was matted and unkempt. A long gray beard covered his face. He held a flashlight in one hand and a pistol in the other. Nearby sat a bag containing $750,000 in American currency. Why didn't he resist? 2 AK-47 rifles lay within reach, but he never touched them. He did not fire a shot. He did not attempt to flee. At first glance, the most powerful man in Iraq, but in reality, a fugitive in a hole. Soldiers pulled him out. They neutralized the target and snapped the handcuffs shut. The capture was clean. From there, the military moved him to Baghdad International Airport. They held him at Camp Cropper. This was a high-security prison designed for the elite of the fallen regime. The bureaucracy took over. They stripped him of his name. He became high-value detainee number 1. His world shrunk to a tiny concrete cell. There was no furniture. Only the bare essentials remained. The era of the dictator was over. December 2003. The fallen dictator entered a world of concrete and steel. His cell was a box of basic necessities: a metal bed frame, a thin mattress, a small porcelain sink, a toilet. One feature never changed: the light. Why was the room never dark? The answer was simple: total surveillance. The United States military kept the bulbs burning 24 hours a day. Cameras tracked every movement. Guards stood watch at every interval. There was no privacy. There was no silence. There were no other voices. Saddam was forbidden from speaking to other inmates. He lived in a vacuum. Once a day, the heavy door opened. He had 60 minutes. He walked in a small enclosed yard. He stretched his muscles. He breathed the outside air. Then he went back to the box. He had only a few possessions. A handful of books in Arabic. The Quran sat on his table. He read it daily. He also had paper and a pen. He wrote letters. He wrote notes. Many of these pages traveled across the border to Jordan, where his daughters lived. He was a prisoner, but he was still a father. But he was also a source of information. FBI agent George Pirro arrived in 2004. He sat across from Saddam for months. Pirro recorded every word. The footage and reports show a specific image. Saddam was calm. He was calculated. He used his voice to dominate the room. He didn't sweat. He didn't tremble. Did he feel regret? Not according to the transcripts. He showed no guilt. He showed no fear of the gallows. He spoke of history and legacy. He believed the future would judge him as a hero. To him, the crimes were necessary actions. Lawyers visited the cell. The team came from Iraq and across the globe. Saddam greeted them as a head of state. He still used the title President of Iraq. He refused to acknowledge the authority of the guards. He claimed he was a defender, not a defendant. Outside the walls, the country was unrecognizable. The Ba'ath Party was dismantled. A new government rose from the ruins. On June 28, 2004, the paperwork changed hands. The United States officially transferred legal custody to the Iraqi interim government. Prime Minister Iyad Allawi was now technically in charge. But reality was different from the paperwork. A massive security risk remained. If the Iraqis took physical control, Saddam might be killed by a mob, or he might be rescued by loyalists. The Americans kept him in their own high-security facility. They provided the walls. They provided the guns. 2 years of isolation passed. The investigation ended. The trial was ready to begin. The transition from prisoner to defendant was complete. October 19, 2005. This was the day the world had waited for. The trial of Saddam Hussein began. Why did the Iraqi Special Tribunal choose the town of Dujail for the first case? The answer was simple. The evidence was undeniable. The proceedings took place inside the Green Zone in Baghdad. This was a fortress within a city. Concrete blast walls, barbed wire, and thousands of American and Iraqi soldiers protected the perimeter. Inside the courtroom, a wooden pen held the man who once ruled with an absolute grip. The charges focused on the events of 1982. Dujail was a small Shia town 60 kilometers north of the capital. Saddam visited the area in a motorcade. Suddenly, gunmen opened fire. The convoy accelerated. Bullets hit the metal, but Saddam survived. The response was a calculated massacre. Saddam did not just look for the shooters, he targeted the entire population. His half-brother, Barzan Ibrahim al-Takriti, led the intelligence teams into the town. They broke down doors and dragged families into the street. The footage shows the aftermath. Hundreds were detained. The archives reveal the names of 148 men and boys. Some were children. Others were grandfathers. There were no individual trials. There was only a signature on a death warrant. Executioners killed all 148. Those not executed were sent to Abu Ghraib. Guards used electricity and beatings. Families disappeared into the cell systems. Bulldozers leveled the farms and homes of the survivors. It was a signal to the entire country. Saddam sat in the dock facing charges of crimes against humanity. 7 other officials sat with him. Among them were Barzan al-Takriti and former Vice President Taha Yassin Ramadan. They were no longer the hunters. They were the accused. This was a first for modern Iraq. A dictator was answering to his victims in a court of law. Millions watched the live broadcast. The camera records a strange sight. Saddam refused to wear a prison uniform. He wore a dark suit and carried a Quran. The tension in the room was visible. Saddam did not remain silent. He shouted over the judges, He interrupted the witnesses. He stood up and gave political speeches to the cameras. At first glance, he was a defendant, but in reality, he was trying to lead a revolt from the witness stand. He called the judges traitors. He screamed that the court was a puppet of the United States. He refused to recognize the authority of the bench. To Saddam, the trial was a theater. He repeatedly told the room that he was still the president of Iraq. The judges did not stop the proceedings. The evidence continued to pile up on the desks. There was no turning back. Thus began the final chapter of the regime. October 2005. Saddam Hussein refused to recognize the court. He did not accept the new government. During the hearings, he would stand up and wave at the camera lenses. He looked directly into the frame. He argued with the prosecutors for hours. He claimed the Dujail purge was a legal act. He insisted he had the right to execute those who plotted his assassination. He called himself a protector. He said he was saving Iraq from terrorists. His confidence remained high. He behaved like a sitting president, not a prisoner. But the pressure moved outside the courtroom. The judges faced constant death threats. Armed men targeted their families. Many officials resigned. Rizgar Mohammed Amin was the first chief judge. He quit in early 2006. He could no longer handle the political weight of the case. Rauf Abdelrahman took his place. He was different. He was strict. He silenced the outbursts and forced the trial to continue. The drama did not stop the clock. Witnesses took the stand one by one. Survivors from the town of Dujail gave their testimony. They described the concrete walls of the interrogation rooms. They spoke about the smell of the cells and the sound of the gallows. Some recounted the exact moment their families disappeared. The prosecution presented physical evidence. They laid out yellowed documents. These papers carried Saddam's own signature. The ink proved he approved the executions. November 5, 2006. The verdict arrived after 1 year of testimony. The court found Saddam Hussein guilty of crimes against humanity. The specific charge, the Dujail Massacre. The sentence was death by hanging. Saddam did not flinch. He did not show fear. He raised a closed fist toward the ceiling. He shouted that he was not afraid of the rope. In his mind, he was still the leader of the nation, but the law moved faster than his words. His legal team scrambled. They filed an immediate appeal to stop the execution. They wanted the sentence overturned or delayed indefinitely. The Iraqi appeals court took over the case. They reviewed the transcripts. They re-examined the signed death warrants. Several weeks passed in silence. Then came the final word. December 26, 2006. The appeals court upheld the death sentence. There was no turning back. December 26, 2006. The Iraqi appeals court issued its final ruling. Saddam Hussein was guilty of crimes against humanity. The judges confirmed the original sentence, death by hanging. There would be no more delays, no more appeals. The verdict was final. Iraqi law is clear. Once the High Court approves a death sentence, the execution must take place within 30 days. But the Iraqi government had no intention of waiting a month. Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki led the Shia majority. He wanted the sentence carried out immediately. Why the rush? It was a matter of timing. The Islamic holiday of Eid al-Adha was approaching. In 2006, the celebration was set for late December or early January. This is a time of prayer and family. The government saw an opportunity. They believed executing the former dictator before the holiday would send a message to the entire country. At first glance, a legal procedure, but in reality, a display of total power. The officials wanted to provide closure to the victims of the Ba'athist regime. They wanted to prove the new state was in control. Plans moved at high speed. Iraqi officials met with United States military personnel. The Americans still held physical custody of Saddam. The two groups coordinated the transfer of the prisoner. The camera records the preparations. Security forces tighten the perimeter at Camp Cropper. Guards check the heavy steel doors. Documents are signed in high-security offices. Every signature brought Saddam closer to the gallows. The execution team was assembled. Judges and official witnesses received their summons. Saddam remained in his cell. Then, the notification came. He was told his appeal had failed. He was told he would die. But when exactly? The answer came on the night of December 29th. Saddam was still inside Camp Cropper, the U.S. military prison near Baghdad International Airport. Officers entered his cell. They informed him the execution would occur the following morning at dawn. The footage shows a quiet cell. Saddam began his final routine. He washed, he prayed, he prepared his black coat and a clean shirt. He refused the final meal offered by the guards. He spent the remaining hours reading the Quran. There was no turning back. This was the final night of his life. Outside the prison walls, the gallows were ready. The trapdoor was tested. The rope was checked for strength. Everything was set. The era of the dictator ended in a cold, concrete room. 69 years old. After ruling Iraq for nearly 24 years, Saddam Hussein faced death by hanging. The execution was set for the early hours. That night, the former dictator remained calm. He stopped shouting. Witnesses reported he became very quiet. He looked peaceful, but also resigned to his fate. He knew the end was coming. Why didn't he fight back? He had spent decades crushing his enemies. But now, he didn't cry or beg for mercy. The footage from the cell shows a man who had accepted the verdict. He spent his final hours in a repetitive routine. He prayed. He read the Quran. He wrote letters. The room was silent except for the sound of the pen on paper. One of those letters was addressed to his family. It was a final goodbye. He didn't just write to them. He also summoned his legal team. He handed his last will and testament to one of his lawyers. It contained a specific request. Saddam wanted a simple Islamic burial. He chose his hometown of Fallujah for his final resting place. At first glance, a defiant leader, but in reality, a prisoner preparing for the noose. He packed his few belongings. He smoothed his clothes. He waited for the guards to arrive. There was no more room for negotiation. The legal process had finished, and the executioners were ready. Events accelerated. The guards entered the cell. They saw a man who had finished his prayers and closed his book. There were no outbursts or struggle. He stood up and followed them into the corridor. The sound of heavy boots echoed on the concrete floor. Thus ended the reign.